And I think that's kind of the point of the world, isn't it? That we can leave it in a better place for our children than we inherited it, so they can leave it in a better place for their children, as each of us, are stewards, really, rather than owners of the present. And that opportunity to create a better world is through our children.
If we want to build a better future, what better way than raising resilient, innovative, compassionate children? My guest today, Paul Lindley, is a British entrepreneur, author, father, and champion for children's welfare. He believes the future of our world depends on rethinking policy and politics to focus on children and young people. His journey from revolutionizing the organic baby food industry to deputy manager of Nickelodeon UK and as trustee guiding Sesame Street to his many other roles devoted to human rights and children's welfare led the late Queen Elizabeth to honor him as an officer of the British Empire. In this episode and in his new book, Raising the Nation, Paul builds a compelling case showing why we must nurture smart, strong, and kind children to one day inherit the stewardship of society. I hope you'll enjoy this episode. Hello, Paul Lindley, and welcome to the podcast, How We Change the World. How are you?
Very good, Deborah. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'll just say that we're speaking to you from 30 minutes from London. You said, what's the name of the town you're in, or the city?
Henley-on-Thames, famous for rowing around the world.
And are you a rower?
A fair weather rower. It's very, very cold.
Well, yes, I didn't say you had to do it on the coldest day. You are familiar. Well, let's start with, you have the initials OBE after your name. That's not something that Americans are as familiar with. So can you explain what that is?
Right. Well, that is, we have an honours system in the UK that recognises public work or excellent work in the UK, and I was absolutely privileged about 4 years ago to be recognised and be honoured with this medal that you get. I got it from Her Majesty the Queen, and it stands for Order of the British Empire, but it's really an Order of British Excellence, which I don't know how your name gets put forward, but it's an incredible honour to meet the Queen. I'm very, very proud. But it represents the work that I've done, the people I've worked with that contributed to the stuff I've done as well.
Well, your entire life has been a testament to making the world better. So I think that was probably well deserved and lovely that they did recognize you for that. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, let's just start by saying you are a very successful entrepreneur. You're the founder, I think you started about 20 years ago, of a business called Ella's Kitchen, which you named after your daughter. And then, which we'll talk about, and then, which is a children's organic baby food and children's food line. And then you also started Patty's Bathroom, which is an organic toddler toiletries brand. So really named after your son. So that's a beautiful thing to do. And I know that Ella's Kitchen took off like gangbusters. It's now selling over 100 million in sales, the biggest brand in London and in the UK. And is it also in the US now?
Yeah, it's been in the US for 10 years, perhaps.
Oh, I haven't been down that aisle as much lately. Sorry about that. So Americans of baby feeding ages are probably very, very familiar with that. So that's exciting. And I know you sold it and you've moved on to other things. You're also the deputy manager of Nickelodeon UK for 9 years, which is that correct? For 9 years?
Yes, yeah.
I don't know how. And then trustee of the Sesame Workshop, which are the creators of Sesame Street. But your interests are so varied and rich. So you're also the chair of the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights in UK. I think, is that in the UK?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also you have a new gig as chancellor. What is that?
So I'm chancellor of the University of Reading in the UK. I'm not sure in the US there's an equivalent position, but it's kind of a figurehead position where I have the privilege of giving the degrees out to graduates and postgraduates. But I also have the chairperson kind of role of helping the soft connections and sort of development of our strategy as a university. So asking what are universities for in modern society, who should go, who should pay for them, what does our university, how does it stand out, how is it different, how can it attract excellent researchers and graduates, and really it's a pleasure to be with young people and see the vibrancy. That's what gives me energy. Some of the things you talked about that I've done are all to do with the children and young people. And, you know, when I reflect back, I think the person that you're seeing now, you're talking to now, you may see as a 50-something-year-old man, but inside of me, it's this little boy that I think is so curious, remains curious. And I think that's the thing that attracts me about the excitement of young people, is their curiosity and their ability to mix that curiosity with a bravery to question the world and an energy to do something about it. And I think that's how we get, that's, you know, the heart of what gives me the energy to do some of the things I've done to try and nudge the world into a better place from the privilege that I've got the opportunity to come from.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, because you're also, as we said, a father of two. Has that been a huge factor in terms of inspiring you as well to work for the betterment?
I got to sort of my children grow up, and at every stage, that looking through their eyes, my ability to look through their eyes and see the world as from when they were toddlers and everything was brand new, and the way they used their imagination and their curiosity, and they got self-confidence and they were free thinking, and just looked at the world like adults did. I used that. I saw what I saw and put it into a book about 6 years ago called Little Wins, and it's about the huge power of thinking like a toddler. And it's really about as an adult world as we live now. If we could just refine the part of us when we were 5 years old to think about the world and look at the world in that place, I think we'd get to a much better place. So when my kids were toddlers, I got inspiration from that. When they were teenagers and they were finding themselves and their place in the world and questioning the world around them, the status quo, and why things can't change, and having, you know, vigorous debates with them and helping them discover themselves and discover the world around them, I really enjoyed it. My kids are in their 20s now and they're forging their own lives, but I remain involved with children in a lot of my work, and that is really what gives me the energy, as we were speaking. And you know, the self evidence is that, you know, in the UK, I think it's probably very similar in the US. They are about 20% of our population, but clearly they're 100% of our future. So if we are looking to change the world for the better, if it's going to be a different place in 10 or 20 years' time, then it's our children that has to come through, because those people who are going to be running the institutions and the businesses and caring for you and I when we're in our older age are the children of today. And if they've not got the skills or the self-confidence or the communication skills or the entrepreneurial skills or compassion and kindness and way of looking at the world with curiosity, then we're not going to get to a better place. That's the key to unlock our world, the minds of our children. One of my great inspirations is Nelson Mandela. He kind of started me on my journey. I started my career in the early 90s when he first became president of South Africa. And one of the first speeches that he gave was around, he gave two very close together. One was around the greatest revelation of a society's soul is in the way it treats its children. That really harnessed the thought in me. That is, I was starting my career, I was starting to work with children, and I was thinking, this is what's driving me going forward. And you know, ultimately, I guess it's ended up in a seed that germinated into the book that I wrote recently. But the other thing that he said, he committed to his nation. He said, we will build prosperity and the development of our nation using our nation's greatest asset, our children. We will build our country for our children. And, you know, I think that's kind of the point of the world, isn't it? That we can leave it in a better place for our children than we inherited it, so they can leave it in a better place for their children, as each of us, you know, are stewards, really, rather than owners of the present. And that opportunity to create a better world is through our children, is what you're going to hear and what the listeners and viewers are going to hear.
Well, and you know, I'm glad, because it is so ironic, I think, that this seems to be as clear as the nose on our face, right? Of course, children are the future. Of course, raising them and giving them everything that we can to support them would make sense, that it would build a better world for everybody. And yet, just those simple words that Nelson Mandela said, that you've also said, it seems like, well, of course, but and yet we don't have policies that would support that type of thinking. We don't have the carry through. So, what is the disconnect between what seems to be clearly no one would disagree with the premise that you've laid out, or that he laid out, and yet we put money or we put other things in the way? But why are we so unaware of the truth?
Well, you just look, if 20% of the people in our countries are children and young people, the great majority of them, if you ask children what is really important in the world or in their life, I don't know, kindness, something around kindness would come really high. Being nice to each other, being secure with nice people is really high. Let's call it kindness. You ask adults, and I don't think that comes in the top 5 in most surveys that you do. So it gets lost with other things in life. Yeah. And so, they are human beings, but they are people. I highlight in my book that, 50% of people that ever lived have died before they become adults. They're children.
Over the history of time?
Landed on our Earth, they would see human beings as children. And so, what they think and how they think about life is really, really important to who we are as human beings, as a society, as a being. And it gets lost between, the little things in life that actually become big things in life, where a country's border is. Well, kids will see kids on either side of that border. And life is obviously much more complicated, and we've got limited resources, and we've got to work out a way as a society to prioritize where we spend those resources and who gets the benefit for them. My argument from my life, or my dedication in the work that I've done, is that kids get a raw deal in that generally, in time spent on them, in money spent on them, in our physical space, the public space that we have that is available to all of us. None of us own, all of us can enjoy. Kids are excluded from certain parts of that space. In the UK, the roads, there are twice as many cars on the roads that children have to navigate around now than there were when I was a child. So they're generally excluded. It's less safe to play. It's less safe to walk to school or cycle to school on those roads. The motorist has more rights, or seen in culture and legislation has more rights to use those roads. Yet, children are part of our society. They've got every right to use that public space for the rest of us. So what do we do about that? And some schemes in some parts of this country close roads at certain times of the day to motorists, so that kids can walk to school, so that they can be healthier, so they can breathe cleaner air. But there's lots of objections to that. So it's very rare, but we've got to decide as a society to take that one very small thing. What do we want? What do we want our politicians to have, use their power to allocate resources over? Do we want the healthiness of our kids and the clean air that our kids breathe to get to school, to learn and to be healthy? Or, it might not be binary, or do we want workers and commuters to drive to work 20 minutes quicker, 10 minutes quicker, 5 minutes quicker, to be able to produce more, let's say, cigarettes, if they work for cigarettes, but it increases the GDP of our country, but doesn't do anything for the health of our country.
Well, and I think we'll talk about that in just a moment, about how almost the rate of the GDP is almost, it's opposite of what you would, the higher the GDP, sometimes the less happy the children are in the country. So, but before we go any further, I do want to mention the name of your book, because I wanted to speak about that quite a bit today. And you mentioned some of the things in the book about, where children play and how they move. And, but I want to go into a lot of those, but I want to start with this big premise of, what's the big picture here? What's the book about, and what is the premise of the book? So it's titled "Raising the Nation: How to Build a Better Future for Our Children and Everyone Else's." And you're speaking about the UK, but it's completely, as a person in the US who read that, I mean, there's nothing in there, not one sentence or one word, I think, that doesn't exactly relate to at least what we're experiencing in this country. It's definitely not true everywhere. There's a lot of other countries where this is not, their kids are not suffering from the same problems that they're suffering for in some of these wealthier nations, frankly. But and I also, I guess, want to mention before we go on into the book is that you were raised in Africa for a good portion of your life, and did that influence this mindset that you brought to?
So it did. Because each of us are a product of kind of our experience, aren't we, in our view of life. And I grew up, I had the privilege to grow up in Zambia for many years, and I got to see, a different environment, different relationships between peoples there, and different problems and different opportunities. And one of the things that I've learned through my 30-year career is really, whether you're operating a business or in a family, the more opportunity you have to experience wider things, the better decisions and the better experience and the better contribution you can make. So build a team in a business that has a diversity of people, whether that's their heritage and their background or whether it's their professional experience. You want everyone like that in the room so you can make the best decisions. And the opportunity I had as a child was to grow up in the UK and in Zambia, and that brought different perspectives. And I hope I've learned from that. But so I did have a different sort of childhood, and everything comes together, I guess, in the last, as I say, 30 years of work to writing my book, Raising the Nation. And really, as you asked what its focus is, and I guess it's really a simple proposition to challenge what success looks like for a society. That's what it is. And see if we can collectively find ways to explore to create that better future for our children. But if our children have a better future, we all have a better future. And I guess my answers are around big public policies that are designed to help children thrive. So that's kind of my measure of how well a society, I think, we should, as human beings, work out whether we're doing well. Are our children thriving? And at the moment, far too many don't, through no fault of their own, but they don't feel significant and they don't become the people that they have the potential to be. And our countries are poorer economically, socially, culturally, because not all of our children become the people that they've got the potential to be. And so that's how I think we have arrived in 2024. And I think we can change things. And I think, other countries, as you say, have taken a different course. Other generations took a different course. And so my book is full of ideas and optimism and opportunity to be better, to do something about it, if our measure of success is how well our children thrive. So I guess I took my 30 years of experience. As you say, I've worked for Nickelodeon for 10 years. I worked for Ella's Kitchen, my baby food company, for 10 years. And then over the last 10 years, I've done some of the things that you talked about, human rights education work, working for Sesame Workshop and Sesame Street. I was chair of London's Child Obesity Task Force for the Mayor of London, and looking at that specific issue across my country's capital, and Chancellor of University. So all of that work has given me a perspective and thoughts and knowledge about children, but it's also given me a huge network of people that are much more expert than I am in specific areas. So for 2 years, I reached out to many of them and asked them to write essays that are in the book. There's a former prime minister in there, there's cabinet ministers, there's mayors, there's academics, business leaders, charity leaders, and lots of people with real lived experience of it going wrong in childhood, of which they could do nothing about. So there's a 16-year-old young woman and an 18 and a 20-year-old written in there. And so their perspective, what they've learned and what they think a government or a society should do about the problem that they've got an idea about what to change. And, I did my own research looking at what happens in other countries where their culture promotes thriving children, or they've set laws to help their children develop and be the people they could succeed. And I've looked in my own country at small things that are happening in local towns or with small businesses or with charities that are doing projects where their children thrive from. And so trying to pull all of that together to say, what's the big idea that a country could do to change its perspective about, actions to change that perspective about what success looks like. And, I think there's a National Children's Service kind of idea that I put together that sort of, in a way, is around how we prioritize our country's assets and the country's budget, the national budget that country has, and how and kids get a raw deal of that share of those assets now. And my whole proposition is we can do something about it. So here's some ideas. Let's begin a conversation and talk about which ones might work, which ones might not, which ones we desperately care about, because, I can give you all sorts of statistics. Let me just give you 3 or 4 perhaps that sort of set the tone, that if people are hearing this and saying, well, kids, have never had it so good. Well, I can tell you that, a third of the kids in the UK live in poverty. That is twice the proportion of kids that when I was a child lived in poverty. We've brought older age poverty down in our country massively, which is a tremendous thing, but it's kind of been at the expense of young people. And so
that's an astonishing number. I just kind of want to put an exclamation point on that. It's nearly a third of the children in the UK are living in poverty. And it is, you have the 6th highest GDP of any country in the world.
That's right. So since I was a child, our GDP has doubled, yet the number of children in poverty has also doubled.
Yeah.
So where's our money going? Well, it's going to a different part of the society who isn't being passed down to, we could get into lots of things about economics. I've grown up in an era when trickle-down economics was the kind of era of capitalism, if you like, and it hasn't trickled down. It's basically where we've got to. It hasn't trickled down the generations, never mind the social structures of society. And then you look at 1 in 6 of our children in the UK have a diagnosed mental health issue, which is 60% up in the last 3 years. So that's a serious thing for our children. If they can't cope with their relationship with themselves, with others, with their environment, with the world, if we look into the future, we have got to do something about that as a society. The play is a thing that I focus on a lot in my book. It is often seen as a nice to have in society, or nice thing to spend public money on. But actually, it's fundamental to how our children grow. All of us as human beings. It helps with socialization. It helps with cognitive function. It helps with personal, physical, and mental health and creativity and working out problems. But the opportunities to play, whether that is in physical space, in my country, half of our youth centres have closed down in the last 10 years. Where do young teenagers go if they're not going to youth centres? They go on the street. Older people object to that, and the kind of things come from that. About 500 of our playgrounds in my country have closed in the last 6 or 7 years. So the toddlers are getting nowhere to play. And then when you look at that space, you look at time. I know in the US this is very similar. I've seen statistics. The recess time in the school day has gone down by about an hour a week over the last decade. Same in the UK. We call it break time. So break time where kids can play has been squeezed out of the curriculum. Kids are playing about 1/10 of the distance that they did from home than my generation did. So parents are very worried about letting their kids out of their sight and where they can play.
Right. For the reasons that you cited earlier.
And they're going miles away where the parents have no idea where they're going. So there's a whole digital play versus free play. So play is a big thing. So I'm just kind of trying to highlight that, that all this led up to the point that made me write the book, that germinated that seed that I said that Mandela set about revealing society's how a society's soul is by how it treats its children, to when COVID hit. And, in the UK, we opened pubs and bars before we opened schools when we had to lock them down. What's that about us? That adults can go and play in a pub and kids can't go to school or play in a playground because we shut the playgrounds too. And those kids, those babies and toddlers from the lockdown times of COVID are now starting school here in the UK. And they are way behind developmentally for cognitive, for speech and communication, for, things like the ability to use the toilet, many of them wearing diapers still. And they're huge issues that are now putting pressure on our education system, where teachers have got to be educators, but there's also got to be social workers and medical people, and it's and we've not kind of addressed many of those things. And it's our mentality of who children are in our society that I think is what's fundamentally changed. At the moment in the UK, we have a COVID inquiry, which is effectively like in a courtroom where lawyers are, witnesses are giving their evidence of what they did during COVID, people who are in charge of our country or in charge of the civil part of our country. And the point is not to charge people or blame people of what went wrong, it's to learn as a country what went wrong from the evidence that's presented. But it's like in a courtroom, it's under oath. And the really telling thing about that is when the government set it up and set the terms of reference for that inquiry out, what are we trying to do? We're trying to learn what's the terms of reference for what it comes out to be. That terms of reference didn't include a single one of the following words. It didn't say anything, single word of children, child, toddler, baby, college, school, nursery, preschool. It didn't even use the word play. So if we're trying to learn what happened from closing down our country in COVID, when children suffered the most from their breakdown in their social structure, their development, and where they could go, yet were the least likely people to suffer serious health issues from the disease, and the learnings we're trying to learn from that don't think about children at all. That says something about our soul.
Well, what it seems that you're referring to is the value of the country, because we'll talk about some other countries, and whether we look at Norway or the Netherlands, countries where children do seem to be thriving and happier and more well-adjusted. Is that what the difference is? I spent a lot of time in Belize. My son lives there in the country of Belize in Central America. It's a third world. I won't call it that. It's a developing nation. It's rather poor still, and those children are the happiest children, as you see oftentimes in countries that are, less developed or less wealthy. So, is it the value system that we're struggling with? Because there's plenty of money, there's plenty of know-how, there's plenty of intelligence, and there's plenty of opinions, and there's even a court of inquiry, and yet the value of the children doesn't seem to be there.
I'd hope that the values of the society hasn't changed, although as life gets more complicated and daily issues come up more, as in from a personal perspective, we have a cost of living crisis now, and there's inflation and everything, how do people afford things? And then as a government level, the world's crazy, and what do you focus on? The benefit to children of society and the importance of them, of us as a complete society, has got lost. That's what I'd say. So my country has had the same government for the last 13 years. Without getting party political, the core constituency of what keeps that government in power are older people. And so they get the lion's share of the political dividends from that government being in power. So they get a triple lock of their pensions, which is like it will be protected against inflation and the economic growth of the country. But children don't get that for the amount of money that's spent on per pupil in a school. So the prioritization, the political prioritization, has gone up the generations rather than down the generations.
As the leadership got older, is what you're saying?
As the party that's in power knows that its voters are older people.
Oh, knows that its voters are, okay. Well, older people have children and grandchildren too, and this is the same with the environment.
The opportunity is to say that's your future, is your
right.
I think there's a human thing that most people don't belong to a political party, don't really care which government is in power. They want the best for their family and their children.
Right.
In this country, we have 8 million children, we have 14 million parents, and we have another 14 million grandparents. Add those together, you've got 36 million people. The UK population is 66 million, so more than half the people in this country are a grandparent, a parent, or a child. All of those people aren't really interested in politics. They're interested in what's best for the child in that family. If we can create a national debate, if we can persuade our politicians that actually it's a political win as well as an economic and a societal win to help those people have the most fulfilled life by helping those children in that relationship be the best people that they can have the best opportunities, then there's a dividend there for all of us in society. And it's not quite clicking. And that's where I think in the sort of Western world, say the US and the UK, there are four things that have fundamentally changed for this generation of children that our leaders, whether they're in business or in government or civic society, have not addressed, have not grappled with for various reasons. And I'll to talk about those four things. Perhaps we'll run through them very quickly. But the first of them is if you're under 30 now, so you were born in the 20-somethings from 2000, your life has lived all the time in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world where crisis has followed crisis has followed crisis. And that has an impact on your ability to plan your life and to be secure in your life, and in toxic stress, because you're going to inherit that from your parents who may not know what to do because there's a digital revolution, they have no idea what's going on, or that there's been a world economic crash and there's no money, or there's a war somewhere, or there's a pandemic. There's been crisis after crisis after crisis. And our politicians and our leaders have had to deal with those crises on an emergency basis almost. And whether they're competent or incompetent, they've had to do that. And they've not been really thinking about planning about long-term stuff. Whereas obviously there's been crises in the past, but they've not been on top of each other so quickly. So if you're under 30, you live in this volatile world. That's a really key difference, because we're not dealing with the problems that are being presented with us. In World War II, for example, my country, all the problems that came out of that, we got a national health service. We had welfare benefits come through from that. We invented NATO. European Union came out of that. All sort of things designed for the long-term security and prosperity of us. That's not happening now. So that's one set of things. A second set of things.
I want to interrupt you for just a moment, because I want to be a little bit more prescriptive or clear about what these crises were. If I could just rattle them off really quickly, the way you listed them, because I know that people tend to say, well, and this is a very common phrase, but kids have always had it hard. You've had to be more resilient. We have always had, whether it was a depression or the war or whatever. And that's true. Kids have always had to grow up in crisis. But if you name some of them, but if I'm just going to quickly say what they are so we can kind of get our heads around what is the totality. It's a major, so we have environmental crisis, which is threatening and existential, and just that alone is something they've grown up with. You talk about a social justice crisis as the world becomes more and more unequal. You just mentioned in your country and my country as well, greater division between rich and poor, and that has happening in countries around the world. The economic crisis that they grew up in started in 2008, where banks failed, complete insecurity. I know people in my own family lost their homes, and it was a major shift in their lives from that point on. We've all had our populist. You had Brexit. We've had a number of crises in politics. COVID-19 is the elephant in the room, which you just mentioned, which will have 20 years at least, or 50 years of fallout. The mental health crisis, from the impact, from the anxiety from all these other crises piling up on top of one another. Throw onto that terrorism, which really started in 9/11, that has not ceased for long. Social media thrown into it, so they're all comparing themselves and adding to the mental health crisis. And then, we can just, you mentioned Ukraine and Russia in the book. We've now got Gaza, and we've got everything kind of imploding around the world. So it's not going backwards, it's actually ramping up. So they've grown up with unbelievable pressures, and it's starting to show in the mental health of adults and children.
Exactly. And I'm just sort of framing that in the context of our leaders have to deal with that. Now, whether they're competent or not, they're dealing with the present. They're not thinking about the future. And I'm saying all of those crises you just rattled off, the 10 or 12 of them, in the past, you haven't had that number coming so quickly and not being addressed by some fundamental change. Let's create NATO to make it safer. Let's have let's have pensions for older people. Let's have free education. The sort of social revolutions of the 1960s that changed things. So I'm saying we haven't had those systemic things that kind of prepare us for the rest of the 21st century when crisis is going to follow crisis. We're not dealing with the environmental crisis in any which way. So, the weather's going to get worse, the insurances are going to go up, people are going to lose their homes, they're going to lose their jobs, and, places are going to be fundamentally changed. We're not really doing anything about it because it's outside of the political cycle, perhaps, or there's other things to deal with now. All of those things affect our children's future, is where I'm coming from. So that's different than ever before.
Yeah.
The second thing that's different is the predominance of the impact of the pressures to make short-term decisions, whether that's in business, where increasingly private equity owns a more bigger portion of our assets, national assets, and they've got a short term, they want to turn it around, put it on, or nothing wrong with that individually. But when national resources or global resources are tied up like that, the decisions are made on relatively short 4 or 5 year cycles. Add to that public companies who kind of operate on quarterly cycles. So the economy is very much driven to deliver value now, not over the long term. So, let's close a factory in a city and the share price might go up, the stock price might go up. But, that company doesn't have to pay for the outcome of what's happening in that city to retrain those people. So, anyway, short-termism there. Short-termism in government is this idea of populism where you can say what you like and you don't really need to deliver it because you'll get the votes if people want to believe you. And, we've had a series of political shocks over the last 10 years or so as a result of that. Education system, certainly in the UK, has got a lot more based on league tables between schools. The funding in the UK of schools is how well they do in a league table of academic achievement. So there's a lot of pressure on young people every 2 years with a public exam to the next exam to be the most important thing in their life, and the schools know they're going to get resources from that. So there's a short-termism, increasing short-termism in that. And then as you just touched on with social media and just media more generally, with 24 news hour cycles where, news needs to be played through very quickly because they need new news. Everything gets concertinaed short. And then with social media, what's happening right now and how you can present yourself with all the pressures of short-term stuff happens. Yet, us as human beings value long-term stuff. We value the environment and our long-term health and our pensions and our national security and the environment and the earth being able to protect us and our children's futures, our children's lives. And there's a disconnect. There's an increasing disconnect between that which we value like that and how our institutions are operating. That's the second thing. The third thing that's fundamentally changed for our children now is the digital revolution and how digital and technology can play such a positive part of their lives. They can learn so much new. They can be connected to so many new people. We can break down inequality by giving a way of extending access. But then there's content and conduct and sort of consumer and context. There's a whole risks associated with them. As the technology advances very quickly, laws and regulations and social norms around them don't catch up quickly enough. So most parents don't have a clue where their kids are online or really what the app is that they're on or the social media content that they're on and what to do about it. So they can't give advice. So they're feeling, infantilized because they can't contribute, which affects their ability to be strong parents, I suppose. They kind of rely on regulators who don't catch up with what they're doing. So I can give you an example of all the social media platforms treat children over 13 as an adult. You have to, if you want to go on, I won't name any of them, but any of them, basically, nearly everyone, all of them, they'll ask you, are you 13? Yet you self-identify as yes, and then you're in, and you'll see all sorts of content because they're treating you as an adult. Yet you go on one of them, Pinterest, I can say that because you go in their terms and conditions, and it will say this site might contain content that's inappropriate for a child.
Okay.
Yet you just said that you could sign up
just
to
let
be
them in.
you're an adult if you're 13. So there's a whole disconnect there that we're not dealing with. So there's this whole thing. And then the final thing that I think has changed for children, certainly in my country, I'm not sure if this is true in the US, but I suspect it will be, is demographic changes. There are less children than there were when I was a child. There are less, those children are a less proportion of all of us. They're much more diverse from backgrounds, and not just heritage, but also the age of their mothers is going to be much more diverse than it was 30 years ago. You're going to get 20-year-old mothers or 18-year-old mothers, and you're going to get 45-year-old mothers. Well, so the experience of childhood, if you're in a family that's diverse, it's different. So all those kids are going to experience different things. So how do we have policies, or how do we have a culture that is about childhood? It's different, and we're not kind of thought about that as we're putting together the support that we can give our children. So my book kind of touches on these 4 things have changed, but there's opportunities that we can do things to help our children thrive that we've yet to grapple with, but we can do.
Well, let's move into some of the we have talked about a lot of the stressors and a lot of the issues that children are facing, and we have to do that. We have to look wide-eyed at these things and not pretend that they're not getting ahead of us or have gotten ahead of us, and we haven't learned how to deal with them in any super productive way. Although, again, we can talk about this, but some countries have done better than others, and it's again where they put the value, I think, in the money. However, let's talk about some of the things in the book. You had so many interesting and powerful chapters. I really encourage people to read it just chapter by chapter and look at the different topics. I mean, well-being, of course, I think your biggest premise is giving some power back to children, whether it's in determining how their schools are run, or I don't know, maybe what they study, how much they play. I think just to touch on a little bit of it, empowerment for them.
Well, I would say the learnings that I got, I sort of set out to write this book with all this research, all these ideas that I had, and then engaging these 68 people, these experts across all different areas to write essays. And then I looked at what I got, and I kind of held my breath thinking, is this just a random set of ideas with no thread that goes through them, that everyone's going off in their different direction? There's nothing that I can draw together to learn that we can move forward with the optimism. And thank goodness that I did find those three things, 3 threads. And I think these are the things that if we start to look at from the lens of, we can really make positive changes to our countries and our society. So the first one is around voice. And how our children and their families do not have a voice in shaping their lives to the extent that they need it to thrive. So they get stuck in systems like an education system or a health system or the welfare system or the environment, the built environment that they grow up in, that's not really designed for them. But when they have a problem, there's nobody there to listen. The kind of computer says no, sort of thing. They get stuck in something that's not listening to their individual circumstances. So a lot of children in our countries will have special educational needs and their disabilities and their in the education system are kind of unique. So there's growth in autism, there's growth in some disabilities, there's a growing division of inequality from an economic point of view. And individual circumstances don't get caught by the system, so that your child finds it difficult to get a diagnosis, try and get the right support or in the right type of school. And if you just get lost, and then that child's life just gets lost within. So we could build systems where we involve children and families in the decision making of how those systems are set up and how they're regulated and how they're designed. Or we could listen to feedback from them if they're not working, but we choose not to do that generally. And ultimately, I would say part of the problem with that is that children don't vote. Not necessarily arguing that children should vote, but I'm saying because they don't, a politician who allocates resources within a country doesn't see them as a primary constituent, and therefore, they don't get the allocation of the national resources that they could do. But the point is, how can we give a voice to children and their families so that people who decide what gets built, what gets spent where, what programs are delivered, what support is available, can listen to the real experience of real people who are experiencing complex lives and not being listened to.
Why are they not being listened to now, do you think? I mean, because I would say in this country, there's a huge force that would say, we listen to kids too much. Like, we need to take some of the power back from them.
Because we're not designing we're not designing the infrastructure that supports human life, the community, with the mind of children. So we will build a city for cars so that the roads work for getting from A to B so you can get to work quickly, rather than encouraging cycling or walking or our children getting to school. So we have an opportunity. In my country, we need to build houses. There are not enough houses for people, so they've got to build houses. They're going to have to build new towns. There is an opportunity to set the planning and the building regulations around those towns to say they must be designed with children in mind as much as everyone else. There's a fantastic organization called 8 to 80 Cities, which are advocates for building a city that is where an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old can thrive, and everyone else in between will thrive because of that.
So they can
Tirana,
walk a few steps.
Albania. Tirana, the capital of Albania, the mayor there has revolutionized that city by making every policy through the lens of, is this good for a child? So, they've done all sorts of things there that are just fantastic, right down to the fact that on every child on their birthday plants a tree, and it's become a thing where it's a special thing where you go and plant your tree. So it may feel a long way from the city that we know where we live, but it's possible. We have to build more houses. We have to build new cities. Why don't we do it from a child's lens? I'm
so glad you're making that point, because we do, there's a lot of talk about making things environmentally so people can walk, so people can, not have to commute so far. But you never hear about saying, why don't we make it focused on children? Never once have I heard anyone say that. I mean, Albania is a very rare example of that. So that's beautiful.
So that's one thing. They don't have enough voice. That came through. How can we give them more voice? What can we do about that? The second thing is they're not thriving to what they could do because they're not having the variety of positive experiences in their childhood as they could. And but by giving everybody, especially children, a variety of experience, early in life, they can find what they're good at and their passions. So it's not just the academic kids that feel as though they're successful because they're getting the grades and they're getting the exam results at school. Yet when we're knocked over, or we need physiotherapy, or we need recovery from something, from an injury, we need the compassion and the care skills. And grandparents may need special care skills and everything from people who don't necessarily need academic qualifications, but they need empathetic and humanness. And we value that in society, but we're not teaching our children, or we're not giving our children confidence to know if they're skillful in that's valuable in life. So the variety of rewards, but more importantly, the variety of experience. If we can help our kids find what they're good at, what they're passionate about, they will find their purpose earlier in life, and they will find out that the opportunities for them are wider than the narrow things that they see every day. But also, they'll find more tolerances. And one of the things that are problems in our society, I think, is that we're only meeting people like us, wherever we're from. And how we define who us is a core thing of this. We should be explaining it all the time. But if we give kids the opportunity to mix it up and get the tolerances and understanding, and everybody lives their life like they do. But if we can get out of the little silos that we've got, we'll match the right skills with the right jobs and the right enjoyment from life, and we should do that as early as life. So how can we encourage kids to have the variety of experience? A tiny example I would give in the UK is around work experience with kind of teenagers. So if they're in school, a lot of kids will find an opportunity to get some work experience, internship kind of stuff. Now, if you're a middle class, and a richer person, you'll be connected and you'll find somebody who's a friend of yours or a friend of a friend or a friend somewhere in your silo that will give your kid a job. If you don't have that access, you're a massive disadvantage straight away. So why can't we open up that network stuff to all kids so that we integrate it into our either education programs or our civic space, so that every child has a right to experience different kind of jobs or different kinds of opportunities, or give them the opportunity to do that. So that will benefit our country in so many different ways. And then the final thing that was the thread that came through what everyone was talking about is that we tend not to value well-being as part of core part of being able to thrive. We as living in the societies that we live in now, always tend to value quantity over quality. More stuff, more qualifications, and actually sometimes that's at the expense of a quality of life and a mental wellness and a sort of longevity of life in terms of being at peace with yourself. But we put a lot of pressure on our kids to do more all the time, and we fail to spot when to stop and not push too far. So we have GCSE exams at 16 for our kids, for example. Now, we tell them, most parents will tell them the really, really important, most important part of your life so far, and you can get like 5, you can get 10 or 12. And really, if you get, you can push your child to take an extra one, but it's going to make no difference to their lives ultimately in the long term. That one extra, whether it's 5 or 6 or whether it's 10 or 11.
Right.
But the pressure that kind of gets put on is just an endemic thing within society. So how can we start to measure? You only change when things you can measure. And how do we get a better measurement for what that well-being is, especially with our children? Those statistics I gave, the mental health challenges of our children in this toxic environment where there's this VUCA world I talked about, have gone up 60% in this country. And we're in the last 3 years, and we need to do practically something about that.
I think it's really fascinating that it all comes down to what seems like the most basic thing, which is well-being. And like, how can that most basic thing be ignored? So, maybe someone doesn't need to take trig, maybe, or some advanced chemistry. Maybe they need to take, as you said, something that would suit them more empathetically, or they could help people. Those things are ignored. That is the well-being of the child, but there is this pressure to everyone has to get better grades and in certain subjects even, why should we all study a subject that is not for us, at least the levels that we have to study them at. It makes no sense. So I just thought it was interesting that every single person, I think, or maybe you just pulled that thread through as the author, to say that just basic, simple well-being is what should be focused on. I mean, these are simple things you're saying. You're saying give them agency, give them a voice, give them varied and positive experiences, and tend to their well-being. I mean, it's a priori. We are almost born knowing that. But
so here's a very simple example of that variety of, if you're lucky enough to live in a house that values education or has a history of education throughout the generations, when it comes to the summer holidays, you are much more likely than from a child from a family that hasn't had that heritage to visit a museum, to have a book in the house to be able to pick up and read, to go and search stuff on the internet, to have access to the internet, all of that sort of stuff. So by the time the difference between when you've left school at the end of one school year and you start to go in a month or two later, and that summer period, there's going to be a difference outside of school to the education possibilities of those two different sets of kids. So how can we help, just take literacy, how can we help more kids be literate? Now, you said earlier, I was lucky enough to be a trustee of Sesame Workshop in Sesame Street. 53 years ago, they worked out to use television to help kids learn ABCs, 1, 2, 3s on television outside of school. Fantastic. And it's a wonderful organization. It's made a difference to so many millions of children's lives over the last 50 or so years. One of the things in my book that is a fantastic idea, I think, that will cost absolutely nothing, but could change the literacy opportunities for so many children, is to have subtitles, closed captions on programming for children on by default rather than off by default, and you can turn them on. So every child's program, whether it's on every broadcast program at the moment, has to have, certainly under UK legislation, I'm not 100% sure about the US, has to have closed captions made. The broadcaster doesn't have to put them on, but gives the consumer, the viewer, the option to put them on. I'm saying to change the rule the other way around. So they're on, anyone can turn them off as soon as they want, but keep them on. I've seen academic evidence to show that literacy rates double for children who watch them for an average amount of programming that they watch.
It's just passively they learn by,
yeah. So in the UK, the average child watches about 11 hours of content a week, television and YouTube and the internet and everything.
Okay.
If all of that had subtitles on and they could read at the same time, over a year, they would read more words than if they read the entire Harry Potter series, the entire Narnia, the entire Lord of the Rings series, and everything that Roald Dahl ever wrote in 1 year. And they're a child for 15, 16, 17 years. So that costs nothing, because they're making the closed captions anyway.
Right.
It would help disadvantaged kids much more because it will bring reading into the home in holidays.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so it help it with equality, and it will help blur. It will help entertainment educate, which is what the heart of Sesame has been from the very beginning.
Sure.
So there's just an idea of a positive thing that we can do, and it doesn't reduce anyone's choice to do anything. You can turn them off now instead of turning them on.
Yeah. I think that's a great idea. I've never heard that before, and I love that. It makes me want to think about how many things that you bring up in this book that really, it's not a matter of cost. So people will look at I keep going back to these countries like the Netherlands and Norway, and I think Finland as well, where they do spend a lot more on their children. They spend a lot more on childcare. They spend more on education. There is a higher output, but and there are good results. But I don't know if it's because of the money or because the focus is on saying let's put our energy here. Because so many things that you talk about, whether it's play, like some of them are very, very simple, like what the one you just mentioned, or just building more playgrounds, or just letting kids play closer to the home. It's just a matter of thinking about it, not necessarily.
But some things do cost money.
They do. But a lot of them don't.
I've got an economic argument I can share if you want to get into it about how we can pay for some big, big things. But some things don't cost a lot of money. The thing I just talked about then, if we're talking about variety, what the Netherlands does fantastically is having co-located nursery, preschool, and day centers for older people or older people's homes.
Yeah,
and so
amazing.
They're together and they're learning together. They're learning from each other. They're doing stuff together, playing games, whatever, together. And the benefits of that socially, intergenerational interaction, showing that they're learning from each other, understanding each other and how society is built. Economically, it's cheaper. You don't have to have two separate places. You can have them on one place.
Yeah.
And then socially, as in families can see each other better, grandparents and children, etc., really works. So you can look in my book and you can see the evidence from those different nations where that is more common. We started trialing some of that in the UK to some positive results. So that's another kind of smallish kind of thing that we can do that doesn't cost. It actually saves money. But there are significant things that will cost money that I can argue. We can make an economic case to argue why we should invest in those.
What would be an example of one of those that we would need to put money into?
World-class childcare, for example. So to enable parents to work. There is evidence. This is without getting into where children should be brought up. But if parents want to work, they should be comfortable that their child is in world-class childcare. Now, I can pick a country where this is done exceptionally, and we might not think it's the greatest country in the world from the values, etc. But Cuba, 99.9% of their preschool children go to world-class daycare, nursery, preschool. They've chosen to invest a lot of money in that. Now, I'm not saying we should build a society like Cuba, but I am saying there are things from all sorts of places around the world where we can learn. So if you're going to set up a world-class nursery system and preschool system, it's about making it affordable for average all families. It's about understanding to what extent the government might need to subsidize that. It's about looking at the supply side of that. And, at the moment in the UK, people who work in the nursery settings are paid the minimum wage. They could get the same amount of money as stacking shelves in a supermarket. So how can we professionalize and make qualifications and a career for those people wanting to get into that. Because if we all stand back from this, can we think of a more important thing than those early years developments, giving the opportunities for our children to get world-class early years development at the same time as the parents can get satisfied with their parenting, their child's development, and their careers and their opportunity to improve their family's well-being.
Benefits. Yeah, the benefits just go on, and they always pay for themselves at the end of the day. You know, yes, you pay a higher salary now for childcare, high quality childcare, but then eventually you get these children who are able to run a country and able to manage their lives and every other thing. You know, we're getting close to the end of our time together, and I wonder if you'd want to sort of summarize your perspective on going forward and what you recommended, you know, in the book, and what, you know, what your, I don't know how to. Okay. I'm going to let you put the words together for me.
Okay. I think, you know, just generally, standing still, we go backwards in society. In, you know, evolution is all around. The ones that win are the ones that adapt to a changing environment. It's not the biggest species or the biggest individuals or the fastest. It's those that can adapt to a changing environment who succeed the best. They thrive. Let's look at that as a society level, and let's look at that as individuals. We have to adapt to a changing environment. We've already spoken that our environment has changed. So it's a volatile, uncertain world with crises all the time, where short-termism is dominating, where we've not got to terms with what digital is doing to our lives. We're not maximizing the positives, we're protecting ourselves against the negatives, especially for our children. And our demographics are changing, and we're not adapting to that. But we have the opportunities, because the wonderful thing about human beings, I think that the thing that's unique about us, that's helped us be the dominant species on Earth, is that we have imagination that can imagine things that don't exist, and we can have the wherewithal to make them happen. So you, I, any of the listeners or viewers to this can have had a dream last night and have woken up this morning with an idea that nobody else has ever thought of, no human being has ever thought of, ever. Someone did that invented the wheel at some point, right? And we've got the opportunity to imagine and then create, with collaboration and creativity and trial and error and in technology, to create a better world. And history of humankind is littered with that. History of the last century is littered with that. It's brilliant. We can advance. We live better lives. We can live better lives. We've got to focus that, I believe. We've got the opportunity to focus that on improving the lives of our children for the next decade, so that they can thrive and have a better world. And I think, going back to Mandela's quote, I would say, you know, what does a society reveal about itself in the way it treats its children? Well, if we value childhood, we can value it, thriving childhood, because thriving children become thriving adults, and we'll have a thriving society when we have thriving adults running it, working within it. And that's good for those children. They're going to thrive. It's also good for those of us that aren't children now, because we'll be surrounded by thriving children, adults that will look after us in our older age. But more fundamental to all of that is an existential question we've got to ask ourselves is, do we value thriving childhoods because we value thriving childhoods? Full stop. They're an important part of society, in that they give us a perspective, they give us hope, they give us curiosity, they give us a mindset, they give us unconditional love. And if we compartmentalize childhood into it's over there, or we're not investing in it, or children aren't welcome in this kind of public space, or it's all about marketizing their childhood with their toys and their education, and it's all about getting a better job in the future, not finding a rounded human being who can be the best person that they can be. If that's what we're going down, we are not going to get to a place where all of our children can thrive. And we are not going to get to a place where we will discover stuff about ourselves and find the next inventions and the next entrepreneurs and the next carers, because we're not valuing the 20% of the people who are children in our society and what they bring to us and what we can learn from them. Not really what they learn from us, but what we learn about grounding ourselves in what true joy is in a child's laugh. For the first book that I wrote, I remember interviewing a senior person at IDEO, which is a Californian ideas company, fantastic company.
My nephew works there.
He just said this off-the-cuff thing to me, which has really stuck with me all these years later. He said, just imagine what the world would be like if every office just had children's laughter piped through the sound system, and you just heard children's laughter constantly. And I thought that is, as we're obsessed by we've got to grow GDP, or we've got to make a more efficient car to get somewhere 10 minutes faster, or whatever it is like that, we could just ground ourselves in, maybe we ought to hear children laughing more often.
Even you just saying that makes me, I just have this joy just thinking. I can't even hear it, and it makes me feel lighter, Maybe not all day long. We don't, but just, I think that's such a powerful, just the joy. If we had nothing but the joy from children, our lives would be so much better.
So I've had the privilege of, like we all have, of being a child. I've had the absolute privilege of having children, and I've had the incredible honor of working with children for 30 years in entertainment with Nickelodeon, and in trying to make fun the weaning process and the nutrition process with my company, Ella's Kitchen. And what I've learned from all of that is children really can teach adults so much. They are so important to life, and they are, to me, the perfect human beings. So the imagination, the free thinking, the self-confidence that they bring, and the fact that we were all one once, means that we do have the ability to think like one at some stage, and remember that how important childhood is to all of us, because we value childhood, as well as the fact that it's in our self-interest that our children have successful lives, because they overlap with our own lives, and our lives will be better.
Well, that's a beautiful way to wrap it up. I really want to thank you for starting the conversation, because I think it's as you said, you started Ella's Kitchen. Any of us can start anything, anytime, right? You started Ella's Kitchen. You had this idea. You woke up, and it changed a lot of lives for a lot of people. Yeah. Writing this book is the same thing. It's like, let's take this conversation, really study it, really elevate it, and spread it around the world, and let more people, take it and make it into something.
So that's exactly what the book isn't saying, here's the solution. This is what we should do. We should do everything that's in here. I'm saying there's some ideas in here that can
hold it up a little more slowly.
Please, there we go.
Raising the nation.
Digest it. Comment on it. There's a website. There's hashtags. If we want to get a conversation going, let's find a way to see if, as a people, we do value childhood. If we get an awareness of it's really important that childhood is not succeeding. We're not valuing childhood, and let's start to think of how we could change that, because it's happened in the past. We've got an opportunity now, and without thriving children, we haven't got a great place to go to.
Let's start a movement.
And it's got dark behind me, so I'm very sorry if
no, it's okay. Actually,
at least sunset behind me.
I know. You can tell how long we've been talking. We went from very bright to very dark, but your face is still lit up. Yeah, let's keep this conversation going. I would invite people to write you, and to write me, and I'd love to start it a little bit more in this country, or a lot more, because I think it's brilliant what you've done, and I like it. You just have to say it. Somebody just has to start something and say it, and give it some energy, and it can grow. So, thank you so much.
The thing I finished on was, this whole podcast is about changing the world for the better, and yes, it takes individuals to be brave enough to stand up and say something different that changes the world, but they're not necessarily the most important people. The followers, the people that are the first people to adopt that change, or believe in that change, or spread the news of that change, are the real change makers. But people who, children have changed the world. You look at Malala now, or Greta Thunberg. You look at how children are used in the media. They're so emotional. Images of war focus on children because they're so emotional to us. Opportunities, uplifting things about children's joy make news. children like Louis Braille, the way blind people read. Louis Braille did that at 14. There's children that change the world themselves.
Yeah.
But without, with the hope that they bring us, we can change to a better place. We can always get better, and that's what my message is. And we can be optimistic that there is a better future to build.
And then let's build it. Right. All right. Thank you so much. We'll continue the conversation.
Welcome, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.